Hello everyone and welcome to Making Remote Work. Today I have the honor of welcoming Srikanth Kannan, Associate Professor of Strategy at The Ohio State University. Srikanth, welcome to Making Remote Work.
Thank you, Yulia. I'm very happy to be here.
Excited as well. For everyone to get to know you a bit better, could you introduce yourself and your research, especially as it is related to remote and distributed work?
Thank you. Yes. For my dissertation and for quite some time, I have been looking at how companies offshore work to remote locations and outsource it to other companies. And by definition, that is remote work. So I have been looking at some of these things for a few years now, and I'm very excited to share some of the findings that I have from my work.
Perfect. I'm particularly curious because I used to work for a company that actually offshored its R&D departments and even manufacturing departments to Romania. I'm Romanian as nationality, so I'm curious to learn what your research says, because I could witness some of the good and the bad of offshoring on my own skin for about 8 years.
Right. So in general, one of the reasons why offshoring does not work is because companies have not designed and taken into account the kind of interdependence that goes into work setting. So think about it this way. Suppose two people are working on a project and they need input from each other. So if I have a question, I walk over to your desk, Yulia, what do you think? Is this the right way to approach this? And you say, well, Shri, perhaps, we should think about it this way. We have this quick discussion. We go back, we do our work. Now, suddenly you are sitting in Romania and I'm sitting in the US. How do we make this informal interaction work? And that has always been a big challenge. And that is something that in my research, I found two things, interestingly. The first thing that I found was companies or managers actually downplayed how important that is. They just did not realize how important informal interactions were to effectively do the work that you needed to get done. And the second interesting finding was even when they realized how important it was, they chose not the most effective strategies to make it work. So, for instance, here is an example that I can kind of easily give, which is suppose Yulia and we are working together all the time, and we have these informal conversations. Now, suddenly, Yulia is in Romania, I'm in the US. What companies tended to do was to say, well, all we need to do is provide a webcam and a video conferencing channel so that they can continue to talk. But Romania is like 8 hours ahead of me, right? So when I'm waking up and I'm ready to get to work, Yulia is just all done, and you are about to go home. You are tired. That is perhaps not the best strategy. Something else that could have been done is to try and ensure that you can go ahead with your work without having to talk so much to me. And I can go ahead with my work without having to talk so much. So just because there is interdependence between the jobs we do does not necessarily mean that you and I need to be interdependent. That could be taken care of systemically at the end in how the tasks are designed.
That's very interesting. So how does that work? Because in all common sense, you think that if the job is interdependent, then the people have to be interdependent as well.
So that is not necessarily true. So what we could do is we could look at how these interdependencies are structured, and we can change the job design so that the people need not be interdependent. I mean, this is a very, very stupid example. But think about it this way, right? I mean, 20 years back, if you had to get a check from one bank to another bank, 30 years back, you would write a check, somebody would verify it, then you need to take that, you need to go walk to the other bank, you need to give it to them, then they need to verify it. And for you to transfer the money from one bank to another bank would take you like a week or more. And that is because the banks are interdependent, right? They need to make sure that the person writing the check actually has the money and is authorized to write that check. Then it needs to go there, right? It was difficult work. Now all that happens in the space of 1 hour. The requirements have not changed. The design of the task, however, has changed, right? Because what you now have is all these banks have these common standardized protocols. These computers can now talk to each other. And this happens almost instantaneously because the work has been structured, the data process communication has been structured in such a way that the computers can talk to each other automatically without cutting the people out of the process. Something like this can be done in a lot of tasks. We can say, well, I used to work in an R&D facility. How do you do this for R&D? It is difficult but feasible. You can think about most offshoring happens in knowledge-intensive work, in software programming, in consulting, and so on. Where actually this is feasible, people do it. You cannot have a platform like Linux if this kind of task design were not feasible, because people who are working on Linux are scattered all over the globe. So the other thing that you could do is what we call tacit coordination. Tacit coordination is exchanging artifacts, is exchanging information in ways that are not by communication. That is, you and I are not talking to each other, but we are observing each other's work.
Not even written communication.
Come again?
Not even written communication.
Not even written communication.
Okay.
So, for example, if you go back to the software example, or if you go back to, if you think about an example like Wikipedia, what you have is you have a code. You have the repository out there, right? You have a Wikipedia article out there on remote work. If you think there is something incorrect about it, you can go and edit it yourself. You know what it says. The code is out there. You can go see what this code does. And if you think that you need to add a new module that is going to make this code work better, you can see how that code is and you can start rewriting it. And the interesting thing that, for instance, some of the interesting work by Carlos Baldwin at Harvard, is that platforms like Linux and Mozilla are written to make these kinds of interactions much more efficient than, say, Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office is much more integral. It relied on the fact that people were actually sitting in cubicles next to each other and can talk. Whereas Mozilla is written by taking into account the fact that people are scattered across the globe. Right? Mm-hmm. So these kinds of design considerations can be very healthy. So the interesting thing that I myself found in our work when we studied offshoring is that companies were often discounting the power of what we call the modularization strategy or the tacit coordination strategy. And they were overemphasizing what I'm calling communication strategy, which is people getting on the phone or talking on video conferencing all the time.
So what are these? So tacit coordination, you already explained a bit. What are modularization and this communication strategy?
Modularization is the bank example.
Okay.
You standardize the protocols. You standardize the ways that that people need to communicate information from one to the other. That it happens in a much more automated way than you having to put in specific effort each time.
Okay, so you basically silo individuals. So
right.
Each of them has their own task.
With the coordination happening in the background.
Yeah. Okay. And the communication is what I imagine is what's happening right now, right? With everyone trying to move from the real office to the virtual office in the same way, with constant ongoing communication.
Pretty much, yeah. So one of the interesting things that we have right now is that people have had very little time to react. It just burst on us. And because of that, people have not had time to actually design these modular protocols. People have not had time to think about how can I take this job and design it in such a way that they don't need to talk to each other, but this can happen in a designed way in the background. they have just not, I mean, this is a tedious process. It takes a lot of time, and we have just not had time to do it. So.
Is it also, as we talk about it, is it also efficient? Because I think it breaks, at least at first glance, it breaks a lot of the social interaction between people that we seem to be missing.
That is a very interesting thing, which was something that I was going to actually touch on, which is we emphasize coordination a lot. But as we were chatting just before, I actually hate working from home. And I hate working from home because I like to go to work. I like to talk to the people there. I like to bounce ideas off with my colleagues. I mean, it need not even be ideas, right? I mean, just talking to each other about what they are doing, what they are working on, if they have, what their pets got up to, is kind of, it is socially engaging, and social engagement leads to, better motivation, more engagement with work. Now, suddenly that has been cut off. And with that being cut off, it can lead to mental health issues for lots of people. It is simply breaking of habits for some people. I mean, for me, for instance, it's kind of a breaking of a habit. And to get used to a new habit of, me commuting from downstairs to upstairs to where my office is like, I need to get used to that. And
So if we talk about the first example, modularization, would that cut off this social interaction or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, because modularization need not. I will go back to the habits bit. If you are working on a modular platform, so to speak, right, over a period of time, you become habituated to it. So this is the way you work, and therefore you are not expecting the boost that you get from social interaction anymore. Right? I mean, you get your fix from other places, right? Not from your colleagues, so to speak. That is one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is that you may be working with other people. I mean, like, you can think about a shared office where you are actually not interdependent with anybody at all. I mean, this is like, some of us academics, right? We go into our offices and we kind of do our work, and our collaborators are spread across the globe. We don't necessarily need to work with people in our own schools. But it's just nice to have them and chat with them and whatnot. I mean, the work is modular, but the social interaction has not gone away. But of course, once you are working from home, well, I mean, that's a different matter.
That's a totally different beast, I imagine, because then you don't have the social interaction either. So it feels like in this situation where we are now, this is not the best. We didn't get the chance to do it, but maybe it's not the best.
It is not the best. Yes. I mean, for example, another problem that I personally have, and I'm sure a lot of people have, is that the infrastructure is just not great. Even with this recording, I mean, I'm using my laptop camera and laptop mic. But if I were in my office, I would have like a whole set of headphones and my and super HD webcams. I mean, that is just well set up. For me, access to the library is a big thing. In the office, accessing electronic resources is very easy. You just need to click and it just shows up. Here, I need to jump through 3 hoops to get to the sign into the secure server, and then from there do some authentication. I mean, it's like,
and then it lags.
Steps, right? There are all these very funny videos. I don't know if you had a chance to see them, where pets are supremely annoyed that their people are at home, but they are not ignoring them. I mean, I saw this video of this cat that was sitting on a person's laptop and simply refused to move. So they couldn't do any work. Right? I mean, these are things that you kind of need to work around.
Yeah. Like the video that was really, really, it's really history with the guy having a really important conference or an interview, and the kids were barging in with a maid, which was really funny. And
Right.
that's a really old one, but it's still happening, right? It's where we are right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, some of these things are a bit of a problem, but on the other hand, you have some things going for you, right? In the sense that you have been working with colleagues and they know you well. One of the interesting things that I found in our offshoring work is that when there were problems, when so suppose there's a person from China and there's a person from the US, and they are working together, but some problem happened, there used to be a tendency to blame the other person. So it was like, oh, they just don't get it, or they are not very interested in doing this work. This is, they are just not as smart as we are. There was a tendency to blame this other person when it was really a problem of misunderstanding or miscommunication or an improperly designed job. But I mean, this is a version of what the psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error is you don't blame the context, you blame the person. And this was something that we used to see all the time in offshoring. My guess is with COVID-19, with people all seeing these things and having like really good experience of working with each other at work, that people are more forgiving, or at least I hope they are more forgiving. I expect that they would be. They would be like, yeah, I have worked with John for the last 6 years. If something is not happening, there is perhaps his computer is not working well, or I know that John has a toddler. He's taking care of the toddler and trying to work at the same time. So I give you a lot of leeway. And I think that is something that is going to help us a little bit overcome some of these issues, which were not happening. So if you notice, a lot of experts are talking about how you need to build trust. I'm not sure that we actually need to build trust. I think that you already have trust. You want to leverage that trust. And you want to tell yourself that, well, I know so much about this person. I have been working with them for such a long time. I know some of the issues that they are facing, so I'm going to take that into account when I say this is what they need to do, right? A very interesting thing that some of my friends are bringing up is people need to respect boundaries. Yes, it is true that there is nothing to do on the weekends. Doesn't mean I need to work, right? It's not like, don't send me a text at 10 p.m. and expect a reply. I'm not going to do that. So that may be the situation we are in, where perhaps people are not respecting boundaries so much because now that I have a mobile number, I'm just going to abuse it rather than...
rather than just, this guy is free right now, so I'll just cut him the
Exactly.
slack and let him deal with his own issues at home. Srikanth, all of this, or what we spoke in the last 2 minutes, right, about trust, about boundaries, this belong to what you call the tacit coordination, right? Is this shared knowledge that, I'm in a space where I cannot talk, that you can trust me because I have this and this knowledge, so I should just rely on you? Or is it something different?
So these are components of tacit coordination.
Mm-hmm.
So tacit coordination is very much about how we get work done together. We have digressed a little bit into what we would like to call motivation issues.
Yeah.
But if you take care of some of these motivation issues, your tacit coordination is going to happen much better. So they are kind of part and parcel of each other.
I had a question on this, because part of what I read was on predictability and ability to anticipate, right? So you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to constantly and ongoing communicate. You can just rely on each other, and the relationship is better if you can predict the other's action, if you can anticipate what they would do, if you understand what their knowledge is, and what you can rely on. Now, I think it's easy to say it, but I think it's extremely, extremely hard to do. I work in recruitment, just to give you an example, and one of the things we rely on, one of the things that drives performance in recruitment is the relationship that you have with the hiring manager, right? And the more you can predict to them and the more they can anticipate when you're going to bring them the right candidates, when they're going to have interviews, when they're going to hire, the more relaxed they are, the more trust they give you, right? So there is an interdependency there, but it's not as easy to get as some would assume. And it was the same in offshoring settings where I worked, right? You had a lot of ongoing communication, a lot of command and control, just because this predictability, this ability to anticipate the other actions, this lack of shared knowledge was not there. So what would you say that we can do now, right? This is something that is happening right now as well, right? And we could use this kind of mechanism and this knowledge. What can we use to predict each other's actions, to anticipate? What can we do to share the knowledge so this can happen and trust can build?
So tacit coordination is designed. It does not just happen.
Okay.
So the example I always like to give is you can think about firms like Infosys and Accenture, right? They are in the same business at some level, right? Or at least they used to be there.
Yep.
They're kind of in the same business, but Infosys is way more efficient than Accenture, simply because Infosys has spent a lot of time building up this tacit coordination within their firm. Accenture has not done that so much. Accenture has put a lot of emphasis on communicating. This used to be the case like 10 years back when I was doing the study. I don't know how they are right now.
So what did they do? Yeah, what did they do exactly to build this?
So it has to do with training. It has to do with following well understood processes. It had to do with staffing projects such that there were people who got along well with each other and who could work well with each other. And this working well with each other just simply does not mean that A liked B. It meant that A could actually predict what B was trying to do because they had this good understanding of how they would approach a work problem. So these were all designed. So now coming back to this situation that we have right now, we don't have the luxury of designing. What can we do? What we could do is we can leverage our prior history of working with this person. So if you can make teams such that it is staffed with people who have worked with each other for a long period of time, then they can automatically do this tacit coordination because they are able to predict. Just like what you were saying, if you have worked with a hiring manager before for some time, you have filled several positions for them, you kind of understand what they are looking for and how to satisfy what they are looking for with fewer trials. So prior history and a shared culture within the organization of this is how we approach work, this is how we think about things, this is what we value. So for instance, we could say that, going back to your hiring example, we could say that as an organization in this team, we are going to emphasize people skills much more than technical skills because we think we are going to help train people on technical skills. So this is a shared understanding that you have between yourself and the hiring manager that you have built up with experience. So you can use this when you filter candidates, you can use this. So these are all examples of tacit coordination that you can use now. Your prior experience, leveraging your shared culture, understanding the context. And finally, something you could do is you could have a lot of repositories. So instead of you and I talking to each other, we can have a shared Google Doc where we write something, we have comments, and the other person looks at it, and then they add back to the comments and they change things. They can say, hey, Julia, I know that you always emphasize this, but in this instance, I expect that this is going to be more important. So we can have these are asynchronous ways of coordinating. It does not mean that, I'm at the beginning of my day, you are at the end of your day. But the work can still go on if we can have asynchronous things, right? So I have your thoughts recorded, and I kind of know how you think. So I can start working with the notion that you are going to be happy with whatever I'm doing. And this, if you cannot design it, there are only two ways you can do it. You can either leverage your history or you can leverage your culture.
Got it. Now, we spoke about a third mechanism, and then I'll come back to all three of them to understand which one is better, if there is one which is better. So we spoke about ongoing communication, and actually, I'm not sure if you managed that, if you had a chance. I don't think you had yet a chance to look at the research that Panish Puranam and Marco Minervini did just a few days ago. They conducted a survey online asking people about the situation and what they're doing with remote work. They had about 430 replies. It's online already. And then what they saw is a lot of focus on ongoing communication, right? Out of the three methods you mentioned, ongoing communication is right now the focus. So is this helpful? Is it okay to be 24/7 communicating or not? What could be the positives? What could be the negatives of doing this?
This is very similar to what I found in my research, which is that even when all this was planned and so on, managers still seem to emphasize ongoing communication. So they were over-investing in communication, they were over-investing in video conferencing, things like that, than in some of the other two mechanisms. As I see it, the exact same thing is going on, of course. The problem, the advantage is that from 10 years back to now, the Zoom did not exist before. Now Zoom is kind of great, right? Some of these things have become much easier. Webcams have become integrated into your hardware much more easily. But you still do not get around the problem that you are at the end of your day and at the beginning of your day. It still does not get around the problem that just exactly when we have our scheduled conference call, my kid is screaming and I really need to take care of it. So I do not see this, I can see this as a useful stopgap arrangement. I do not see this as a very useful long-term arrangement. If this crisis is going to go on for like the next month or next 2 months, which is easily possible, I think relying mainly on video conferencing and messengers and chat is not going to work. People need to find asynchronous ways of communicating, which is using Google Docs, shared repositories, leveraging common understanding so that people can pick up work and drop off work as things as their life events permit. I believe that is going to become much more interesting. I saw that report, and there was something that was very interesting in that report to me. And it showed that the people who were more productive working from home, there were about 40% of the people who said that their productivity increased, and the other 60% said that it's about the same or it decreased.
It was decreased, yeah.
One of the very interesting things about the people for whom productivity increased were people who were kind of senior.
Yeah.
That is,
managers of managers.
Right, managers of managers, people who were senior, and those who already had experience working from home. If you remember, we were talking about infrastructure issues, we were talking about distraction issues. If people who already had experience from working from home, they have probably already taken care of some of these things. I may even go out on a limb and say managers of managers perhaps have older kids, right? That they don't need to sit with all the time.
Yeah, older kids, we even said that maybe wealth is at play because maybe they earn more, so they have a bigger house with a separate office.
Right. They can have a separate office, right?
Yeah. Autonomy was at play as well. So yeah, there was a few hypotheses surrounding that.
And finally, one need to ask ourselves. I mean, one of the interesting things that people keep saying is that as you become a manager, your production time decreases and your meeting time increases, right? So, I mean, if you go the Google way, I mean, or the Amazon way, where they are like, meetings are a waste of time and we need to get to work. Perhaps that is what is happening to them. Now that they are being forced not to be in meetings, they are perhaps getting a lot more work done than they normally would.
I can see how that would work.
So there is some very interesting data in there, but it needs to be, we need to parse it down a little bit more to really understand where this is coming from. It is actually very fascinating what they found. I'm very curious to see how much follow-up work can be done on that.
It will be, because it's left online, so people can still answer. So we are all still promoting it, so we can get as many answers as possible, and then update people in real time, right? So maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, just add to the information and let them know where we are.
Yeah.
I have a question, Srikanth. Do you think that these 3 ways of coordinating, right, do they happen at the same time? Are they stages through which companies go? Because some of them require more design. Some of them can be done more on the spot, like ongoing communication, right? Where you have modularization or you have tacit coordination, you as you said, you need a bit more design. So do they happen in different stages? Or should companies say, hey, this is what we can modularize, this is where we can have a bit of tacit coordination? So how should they think about all 3 of them?
Ideally, all 3. So if you think about the production function, you need both capital and labor. Mm-hmm. You cannot get rid of labor and just have capital. You cannot get rid of capital, just have labor. But you can substitute for them at some level. I think of these 3 mechanisms that way. One does not make the other go away, but one can substitute for the other at the margins. And for different companies and for different kinds of work that you do, this rate of substitution is going to be different. For some kinds of jobs and some kinds of firms, modularity would be easier. For some kinds of jobs and some kinds of firms, tacit coordination is going to be easier. And as you rightly pointed out, for someone who hasn't thought about it very much and hasn't done a lot of legwork, the only thing they can do is communication. I mean, like, they can't do anything else because they have been forced into a situation where they have not been able to make these investments upfront. The question to ask right now is, as you move forward, where is it easier for you to invest? Is it easier for you to invest in tacit coordination? Is it easier for you to invest in modularity? I do not have data on this. My hunch is it is easier to invest in tacit coordination because you already have this rich history of working together.
Wouldn't it be also better long term? I think modularization you can do at any given time at some point, right? And just split tasks. But whereas this might seem like it can help long term as well, because it builds trust, it builds shared knowledge, or it's just a thought, but
that is unclear to me which one is better long term.
Okay.
The examples that we do have of the most successful work is modular work. Because once you do modularize, then you can actually spend a lot of effort improving the components individually. So it is quite unclear to me, or I mean, I haven't seen data that suggests that one is better than the other long term. On the other hand, my impression is right now it is easier to start with tacit coordination than with modularization, because modularization does actually mean that your work changes in significant enough ways. And somebody needs to do a process study, they need to do business process reengineering, then there needs to be different kinds of training. That seems to be a little bit difficult to pull off in this kind of a situation, but leveraging what we already know about our coworkers and leveraging how we used to work as a team and use that, what we already know, we end up using that to make some leaps of faith, seems to be something that is more feasible and easier in the short term.
Got it. Thank you so much. I have another question, and this is something that I kept hearing everyone in academia talk about, and this is about co-located communication versus what you would have more technically driven remote solutions, right? The video and chat. Why, and this is for personal experience more, why do we believe that always co-located communication is better? Because I find that sometimes running meetings online, even if they are difficult, complex meetings, people tend to focus better. And in the end, you are not looking at each other. You are looking most probably at a screen or some common document you have together. You have the ability to see each other if you want. You have the ability to talk if you want. You can do it from wherever, whenever. So why do we always say that co-located is better than remote?
Co-located is better than remote simply because you have a lot of other cues that help provide a grounding for the context and the situation. How do we call it? So when we talk about tacit coordination, it's all about leveraging other kinds of knowledge that you have other than what you are talking to each other. When you are co-located, all those other kinds of knowledge you are automatically taking into account. So you can think about co-located communication as communication and tacit coordination happening simultaneously. When you are doing it by video, this tacit coordination component drops off. All you have is what you are talking about each other. So I go back to the example that you were talking about where you say, if you have a shared document, you are looking at it, right? That is actually something very interesting because what you are doing is, apart from the communication, you are bringing in some of this tacit component back in by having a shared document that everybody is looking at the same time and everybody is, especially if you are annotating and people can see these annotations simultaneously, right? This is all components of tacit coordination that you are bringing in with your communication. So suddenly it feels like communication is better. But think about an example where everybody is on the phone, nobody is on a video, right? And they don't have a common document. They have kind of a loose agenda, and they are just talking.
That's definitely unproductive.
Mine is not going to be great. It was actually very interesting. I was speaking with a friend of mine just 2 or 3 days back, and he was complaining a little bit about working from home, saying that the meetings are not very efficient and it's not very comfortable. And after a little bit of questioning, I figured out 2 things that were going on. One is, for this person, English is a second language. And English being a second language, he was much more comfortable and felt like his expertise were coming through if he were sitting in front of a person rather than speaking on the phone, because on the phone it felt like people were not paying a lot of attention to him because his language was not as fluent as his. The second reason was, given that for him languages is somewhat of an issue, he was heavily reliant on visual cues to figure out whether the other person was following what he was saying. And he was using these visual cues to tailor his message on the fly to ensure that this other person was understanding some of the technical things that he was trying to explain. Suddenly, all this is wrong when they were talking on the phone rather than rather than face to face. So these are some of the things. I mean, like, though we can say that this was kind of peculiar to a person who has English as a second language, you can think about it if you're talking about complex subject matters. We actually rely on visual cues to figure out whether the other person is actually comprehending what you're saying, whether they are understanding, whether they are agreeing. If you are frowning, if you are, if your eyebrows go up, I'm like, okay, I need to provide a little bit more information here because. So it is for these reasons that people think that co-located communication is much better. It provides this additional component and that is why people, for instance, prefer video conferencing over audio.
Yeah. I hear you, and then maybe I'm in a fortunate situation where I have 2 or 3 screens surrounding me, so I can have a document on one, I can see the faces on the other, and I can juggle between them because I've been doing this work from home for about 10 years now, so I do have the right setup. I stumbled on
Apart
issues.
From the setup, you also have a lot of expertise now on how to make these work.
True. Thanks so much for sharing, but indeed you are right. Now, I do have one more question related to your research, which is, I know you've also studied diversity and team performance.
Mm-hmm.
And can that translate in any way to the situation that we are facing right now, especially with people having to communicate across borders, across cultures, across time zones, all remote? Can we get any learnings from that? Or just general learnings, if not?
So one of the most interesting things that we learned from my work on diversity is this propensity for the fundamental attribution error. We are much more likely to commit the fundamental attribution error, that is, blame the person rather than the situation or the context, with more diverse people than with people that we are more intimately familiar. There is much more research that needs to be done on this, but it seems to be a fairly common proposition that diversity matters simply because we are more likely to attribute the inability of someone to get the work done to their personal characteristics, like they are too lazy or they are not working too well, right? Rather than to situations along the lines of saying perhaps they are having a home situation that is making it difficult for them to do. Perhaps their office setup is not very good right now and they are not, right? Perhaps they have bandwidth issues. Perhaps they have, right? So here is a simple example. When I work with some of my colleagues, I turn my video off. And I turned my video off because sometimes the bandwidth in my home is not too good. And so I think that having the voice communication is more important. And if I turn the video off, I feel like I can have much more clarity in what I'm hearing. In one instance, it so happened that when I turned my video off, the person on the other end interpreted it as I'm not providing 100% concentration on my call, that I'm doing something else, and that's why I turned the video. This kind of a misinterpretation is much more likely to happen with people we perceive as others rather than our friends. So this is something that I'm hoping is not going to be a big problem here, because what we are doing now is we are actually interacting much more closely remotely with colleagues that we have been working much more closely with in the past. It is going to be much more of a problem, for instance, with the new hire.
Yeah.
It's going to be more of a problem with the person that you have always been working remotely. It is going to be a problem with somebody who has just been promoted, for instance, right? And have a slightly different job description. This is where I expect these to be much more problematic than diversity per se. But again, hopefully Panisha's data will say something about it.
If we were to summarize 3-4 takeaways out of our discussion, something that HR, business leader, employees could learn from this, what would be those 3-4 takeaways?
Okay, so my first takeaway would be people generally tend to overemphasize the effectiveness of video conference. They really overemphasize that. And they underemphasize the effectiveness of some of the other coordination mechanisms that we have, especially tacit coordination. They should think much more carefully about how they can make tacit coordination work for them. They should think much more carefully about how to get asynchronous coordination going. For instance, can they provide repositories? Can they provide shared documents? Can they provide things that people can dip in and dip out of rather than everybody having to work on the same thing at the same time? The second thing is, I would suggest, is to be mindful of the context. People working from home have all kinds of problems that you perhaps do not always have insights on. They could have cats that are overly needy to kids who want to play with data. And so that understanding should, I was appalled when I read an article, I think in the New York Times, where it said something like, there were managers who essentially said that you can have designated bio breaks from 11:15 to 11:30 and things like that, and all the other time they should always be visible on their vector. This is exactly the wrong thing to do. The third thing I would do is that going to the office it's not just about getting work done, it's also about socialization. It is also about getting people motivated, getting people into the work zone. So anything that as a company that you can do to help people motivated and help them out of social isolation is a good thing. So you don't always need to have scheduled meetings just to talk about work. You can have unscheduled meetings, just calling somebody, having an informal Skype conversation, say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? Did you see this new movie on HBO? Some of these things have value, especially in this situation. And the last thing that I would like to emphasize is respect boundaries. Respect people's boundaries, respect that there is, evenings and weekends, respect that there may be things going on that you are not necessarily observing. So provide this benefit of doubt. Don't automatically jump to conclusions based on what you can see, because there's a whole iceberg below the water. So those were the 4 things that I would emphasize right now.
Srikanth, thank you very, very much for your time today. Thank you for all your knowledge sharing. Thank you for the research you are doing, and looking forward to talking to you again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yulia. I really appreciate the opportunity.